Hey, SpaceWatchers, this is Space Café Radio, your channel about trends, awesome events, and interesting people in the space sector. Welcome to our third session, our final one, when we will talk now about sustainability in this context and in the context of space and space law. We all know sustainability is one of the most pressing challenges in the space sector. And that goes from debris mitigation to regulatory frameworks. And our speakers will bring perspectives on this very critical conversation. It's just 3 of them here. So 4 has been in the program. So Nicholas couldn't make it. He came in earlier and said he has an emergency. So we wish him all the best. So it's the 3 of them here on this panel. And that relates a bit my tight time management. We will start with Dr. Fiona Thompson from the University of Durham. And Fiona will examine the challenges of regulating space activities without rigorous evidence. Fiona. Or it's yours.
So I had a lovely journey through Lower Saxony, which I wished for when I left Edinburgh. I've put should we regulate? So should is a whole philosophical debate that we can go into, but let's say that we come from European countries, so we should regulate. So can we regulate space activities without rigorous emphasis on rigorous evidence? Particularly, I've been looking at this for about 7 years, the environmental impact of burning up satellites on re-entry on the atmosphere. Some of you have heard of it. I'm going to explain a little bit more about it, and I'll come back to this question. I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to pose the questions. Okay, so I should explain what I do. I'm not a lawyer. So I'm a critical researcher, which means I tend to ask about knowledge. How do we know what we know? How rigorous is it? How do we trust it? So that we build upon foundations which we can move forward with. So I'm looking at the moment, funded by the UK Space Agency, what is the actually state of knowledge? So what I do is I'm trying to reduce the hype, the rhetoric and the PR from the actual existing rigorous research, which is pretty sparse. And it's to find open dialogue. So what you're doing is you're not using opinions. And the idea behind it is also acknowledging the world is incredibly uncertain, and that's why we need rigorous research. And especially for regulations, we know it from practical points of view that you'll have huge disputes if you do not actually base it upon something that you can then show and be transparent. So let me explain to you this example. This is a talk that I did with ESA to the space engineers. There's a lot of claims that when you burn up satellites in the atmosphere, that there's a direct link to ozone depletion. And the question is how rigorous it is. It's not rigorous at all. It really isn't. It sounds like it is, but it's much more complicated. So there are at least 2 narratives. I'm also an ecologist. You've got the atmospheric scientists coming in. They have just found exotic particles that they know are from the spacecraft burning up in the upper atmosphere. They definitely know this. That's an effect. That's not an impact. I'm also trying environmental impact. The effect is that it is there. What that then means, we don't know. You then also have astrophysicists who've looked at meteorites for years, and they see the atmosphere as being a natural way of burning up meteorites. And then the space industry, they see as being, it's just a few particles. This is the atmospheric chemist. It's really important that you understand the complexity of this when I talk about regulating. The idea behind it is that you have every day got 440 tons of meteorites coming into the atmosphere. We've always had that. You've got a few spacecrafts that are being burnt up. And what's happening from the atmospheric chemist's point of view is that these spacecrafts may or may not be moving in to change something called polar stratospheric clouds. They know these clouds are changing. When you see the beautiful luminous clouds, they're polar stratospheric clouds. If you see them, ozone is depleting. They're not quite sure if it's from spacecrafts or from meteorites. The distance between burning of a satellite in the atmosphere and then looking at these polar stratospheric clouds is huge. It's enormous. And they have no proof of it. It's still anecdotal. There's also other clouds you can ask me about that are lower down. Without any thought, the satellite industry has just thrown satellites into the atmosphere. There's a whole world behind that and why they do that. Whether a lot of the stuff up there is actually useful, I would question. However, they have to get rid of it. And there's 3 ways you can do it. You can move it up to a graveyard orbit, but you can't do that from low orbit. It's way too dangerous. The other one that you'll do is you call it controlled re-entry, where you drop it off in Point Nemo in the Pacific. It is really expensive, hugely expensive. The other one they do is uncontrolled re-entry, which is very popular because it's cheap. You use gravity, you need smaller launches. So this burning up in the atmosphere is the way it's going to go. So also, design for demise that people don't talk about is that there are laws, there are regulations that you have to make sure that when you deorbit your satellite, it does not hit somebody on the ground. So there's a whole industry behind burning up satellites. It's incredibly difficult. The people that are doing it don't really know what's happening to the materials. You will read things where people keep telling you that they do. The people who do the work absolutely would tell you that they don't. There's a real irony behind it or an oxymoron, is that what can survive going up into the atmosphere is strong, it's thick, is not so easy to burn up. So there's a whole world behind them. And ESA, the safety team, would openly say it's too dangerous not to try and burn everything up in the atmosphere. So that's a political case just now, or so regulatory. Also, I'd like to say that the ablation process cannot really be studied in the labs. It is incredibly complicated. They can't really replicate it. There's almost no way to study it at the moment. So the gaps are huge in this particular topic. There's also the idea that the space industry doesn't believe it's a problem because they think it's small particles. That's another story. They're actually incorrect. A few particles can change these clouds. And the other thing that goes on about it, whether or not you regulate this, is the fact it's seen as being temporary. It's not temporary. Everything behind this is that we're going to carry on burning satellites up. And then it's worthy. But is LEO, I don't see it as being a natural ecosystem. It's built by the military, designed by the military. It's completely anthropocentric. So there's also the trade-off. It's worth burning up a few satellites to save whatever the satellites are doing. I work in astrophysics. I probably should also say that. There's lots of effort. When we talk about regulating, there's lots of effort being put into design for demise. It is built into everything that's been done politically, regulatory, the way the system is developed, the way that they're looking at the materials. It has some real benefits. It helps develop better satellites. It's not an oversight that the space industry were not surprised that they found space particles up in the atmosphere. Some of them will just shrug their shoulders. And the distance between these two fields is that I would say one does not understand the other. So the space industry doesn't understand atmospheric chemistry. And atmospheric chemistry doesn't really understand space, the way that some of the things that they will talk about, the space industry will literally shake their head at it and say, that's not completely true. And they won't engage in dialogue. So the current state of knowledge, we know the effects, but we really don't know the impacts. I've realised I have zoomed through lots of different topics there. There is this thing, we should do something rather than nothing, not necessarily. I work more in ecology, where we made the huge mistake in the past of oversighting our research findings. So the climate deniers today still build on bad research that was done in the 80s, where the findings were poor, where people were so desperate to be listened to that they over-egg them and it's come back to bite them. So the question is, can we regulate? Let's say we take this particular solution. So as you all know, if you're lawyers, regulation has two phases. You can develop the regulations and then you have to implement them. Now, developing the regulations is going to be pretty difficult. The most dominant voice is the atmospheric chemists, maybe, but there's not enough really rigorous evidence. And the CEA in the UK is not planning to look at them for launch licensing. They're not looking at this particular issue for in orbit. They haven't told me why. I think the issue is there's not enough evidence. Another thing is about implementing. This is going to be really difficult to implement, changing the burning up of satellites, which I'm being unbiased here, thank you, is that everything in the space industry is built into burning it up. It's all about this overly romantic, now I'm being biased, overly romantic view that this ecosystem is so special and that we have to do everything we can just to make sure that we move the debris. And I think that our atmosphere, we're playing Russian roulette with it. Can we regulate it? That's what I'd have to ask people here who have a much stronger law background than I have. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very sure that we have some questions.
Fiona, thank you. And for those who haven't yet spoken to Fiona, it took her 9 hours to get from Hanover at 9 o'clock this morning. Sorry, it's Lower Saxony into Bremen. So that's why she just arrived. Can you tell us, please, Fiona, what the difference is between environmental impact and an impact assessment, particularly, as all of us know, before you implement any EU regulations, there's always an impact assessment. And I'm listening to the category environmental impact and that they're possibly not the same.
Okay, old school environmental impact assessment is where you would look at what is the effect that you're actually working with the impacts. The effect is what is happening, and the impact is what does that then mean? So if peat disappears from parts of, it disappears. That's the effect. That's what you're trying to do, and that's really simple. The impact upon that maybe changes into biodiversity or habitat. So the effect, I would say finding exotic particles, as they would say from spacecrafts, up in the atmosphere is an effect. What's happening is people are then doing these huge leaps, and the atmospheric chemists are not doing it because they know their work. they say they don't know what the impact will be. So it's very important that you separate what is happening. It's about transparency as well, so people can go back and say what is actually that you've been looking at, so you can change that.
Do we have another one? Yeah.
Sorry, maybe it's a way too detailed, a precise question, but just for clarification. So basically the problem is, as far as I understand, that meteorites are mainly iron, right? And spacecraft would be aluminium. Is this the issue or just...
There's aluminium in meteorites. It's quite a lot.
Because if what's burning as a spacecraft is still the same metal or still the same elements that are coming in with meteorites, then why it's the problem? Or is there a specific
chemical that are being used in there from electrics that they know are not natural in the atmosphere? That's another confusion, is the fact everyone starts looking at aluminium as though aluminium is unique to crafts, and it's not.
So thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. So as regulators or authorities, we're actually telling operators, dear operators, your liability will only end once your mission has ended. Either you've done a control re-entry, or you show that you've burnt up your satellite or your base object. Are we being incredibly naive about this as regulators or authorities by putting everything in the same bucket and saying, this is how we're going to, as authorities or countries, we're going to ensure we are conducting space activities in the most sustainable manner, so that, are we being incredibly naive or putting everything in the same bucket, saying there's no more liability or no more damage possible when you've either brought it down on Earth, controlled or uncontrolled, or you've ensured it's burnt up in the atmosphere?
So there's always risk. There's always risk. So I think it's 1 in 100,000. You have to prove that your design will burn up on re-entry. You can't get a launch license without it. The way my brain works is I want to say it depends. It's not I'm being difficult, it's I unravel things. So I immediately want to unravel what you've said to me, is regulate what and by whom. And so I think people are trying to do the best that they can in an incredibly complex and chaotic world. So I'm an ethnographer and anthropologist. I work in the world way below regulations. I look at the way the world works around. I think anybody who thinks regulations work can be a bit naive, to be honest with you. I said that ESA, I did challenge. ESA seems to think you'll just fix things by putting regulations. That's naive. Yeah, and that probably sounds insulting. I think this obsession with regulations on everything is based upon a lack of understanding of other disciplines, of the way the world works. I don't know if it comes from space engineering. And I work with space engineers, that sounds terrible, but there's this, just put regulations in. And I want to say to them, all the years of work, honestly, regulations often, if they do work, it's because someone's developed the regulations to fix everyday practice, or they wanted to change something, or it's luck. Because people do workarounds, don't they? Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. And I'm quite sure we can explore on that much further. Thank you. So next one will be Anne van den Broeken from Rivada Space Networks. And Anne will refocus on the sustainability debate on what truly fosters global solutions.
Thank you for that. I thought of sharing how the day of a chief regulatory officer and a nascent satellite operator looks like, and to show actually how much and how thoroughly and in what depth and breadth the sustainability issue is discussed and impacts on a company. Because I have been upset twice lately. First, because the chair of the RRB said that we couldn't rely on the self-interest of operators to take care of sustainability. And the second one was when, in a radio astronomer environment, there was claims that there were no regulations and that operators weren't responsible. So I wanted to make a topic about it, about actually, yes, operators are responsible. And by making regulation on NGSO operators, is that actually really hitting the spot with regards to addressing sustainability? So day number 1, Monday morning, we have a forum with our design engineers and the engineers who are dealing with our manufacturer. And the question is, how do we design the satellites and what do we tell our manufacturer? Regulatory, can you please answer? Of course, I'm not a lawyer. I can't say I don't have an answer. I'm regulatory. I need to come up with some dark art. Then I said, look, what there is currently, the best there is to go with are the FCC rules. We build to that. They are among the most stringent. It's a pragmatic approach, But then I also say, but it's evolving, and it's evolving like everywhere. And we need to get used to a world where we don't necessarily have hard rules, as you say. They could be naive. We shouldn't be over-relying on rules. We need to have internally a culture and an attitude, and then also work more in the soft field of consensus. I wanted to pick up at some point also on the previous speaker that put kind of trust in the ITU. Okay, we have an answer to how to build it. The next thing is that whether hard rules are actually still the best thing. Because Tuesday, we have a meeting with somebody that hasn't slept all night, which is our COO, because he needs to operate our satellites in an environment where it flies among the satellites of many other operators. And how do you practically implement that? And a previous speaker touched upon that, the whole field of flying satellites, the rules of the road. If you have a near collision, who do you call? Do they speak your language? Can you exchange data in the same format? And if you focus on what is important, I would say this is the most urgent thing. Do we need to regulate it? There are quite a lot of forums out there that actually deal with this. And I would put just an idea out there to you for further conversation, rather than going to the ITU, who actually put their hands up for the competency to do it. But I remember the days when the ITU put up its hand to do UNIDROIT, and I've still at this moment in time, a year after coming away from WRC, still nights waking up with post-traumatic stress disorder from that event. So whether ITU is the exact forum, I don't know. But what we could consider is that all the national and regional organizations that are collecting data, that are exchanging data, that have their way of working, that we put them all together in the room, together with insurers, together with industry and the operators, and they work out something that works. Because if you do this by regulation, like where your satellite is going, how it functions, what frequencies it uses, that's not necessarily something that if you put in hard regulations that everybody needs to exchange this information and you need to find it in a database managed by the ITU that anybody actually can or is willing to share. So if you take the geopolitical environment on top of that, then this consensus-built approach may actually work, even though it's not a fully transparent, hard legislation. So I put that out there for discussion, and I'm very happy to take that discussion also up with UNUSA or the ITU, and I'd rather see them as the place to convene this meeting of minds and this thrashing out of rules of the roads and approaches and lists of people, rather than actually taking competency to make big databases to regulate it. Wednesday was a quiet day. Thursday, market access meeting. And for the first time, of course, we know that if you do market access in the US, you have to provide a plan for sustainability. And if you fall over on something with your FCC license, it probably is going to be that. Is this actually helping sustainability? Shouldn't we look at it from a risk point of view? Shouldn't we look at it from who really creates the risk for space debris and all the consequences it has? And is any of the biggest culprits actually going to change behavior due to market access rules in the US or anywhere else? If you look at who applies for authorizations in the US, it's OneWeb, it's Kepler, it's Rivada, it's SpaceX. It's all operators who really don't want dead satellites in their orbits, who have their customers who want it to be sustainable, whose investors want this to be operated safe. All of those actors are responsible to a certain degree. All of them have a very driven self-interest, but then none of them have spacecraft that can't move by themselves. None of them are involved in warfare in orbits. So I'd like to focus the debate on, is market access really a solution? Because I remember clearly where the debate came from. It was driven by a GSO operator, actually, a GSO operator world who created for 50 years the debris, which now nobody else can add to. So I personally think that we should not be naive in where the market access rules come from and consider how much they are driven by competitive interests and not. And that's another element which really is needed. There needs to be an environment of trust among satellite operators, because sometimes you see that GSO and NGSO operators have very different points of view. And I think that the debate is too important for competitive interests to overwhelm the debate on space sustainability. And then we are Friday, and one of my team is preparing a poster for a UN conference in Bonn, and actually put in a very good idea in there. He's put in the idea in there of incentives. Just imagine that we are in a world which is more based on industry self-regulation and rather than hard rules. And on top of that, there's incentives. Like you got the ESA Zero Debris Charter, have lots and lots of good things in there. Anybody who signs up to that and actually implements it gets a reduced insurance premium. And regulators support that. So I think rather than penalty, because that actually drives to, we do it because we must go to incentives. We do it because we want it. Food for thought. And that's the end of the week.
I'm quite sure we will have questions here. And thank you very much. Yes, the discussion of incentives, it's not totally new, especially in the UK. We had this idea. I'm always wondering why then the incentive comes on the insurance premium, because that's, first of all, it's in the hand of the insurance market, which is a market, and premiums are, let's say, determined by the insurers based on their risk assessment, which is not necessarily linked to sustainability issues. It's linked on risk, a risk of damage or loss, etc., etc. That is a very questionable, because you link two things which are not, at least not directly linked. No? And what I have at least never seen is, let's say, other ideas for incentives which also come from the regulator. Of course, then you could have, license fees or no. But so I'm still missing the right incentive idea coming from these discussions. No? And also just shortly, consensus, etc. No? I think we all lived from this old idea from the Cold War where US, USSR, they were in very sharp conflict, but nevertheless in space, they cooperated and even had joint missions, etc. And somewhat we seem to predict the future from the past. No? And also the old geopolitical conflict into the possible next one. And maybe, at least, and it's not legal at all, but I'm not sure whether this is the right thinking, whether we can really draw these lessons and say, next time we will see the same. And maybe that totally destroys all these idea of consensus and collaboration. Just as a comment.
There's nothing to disagree with, but I would say, what do we have to lose for doing it? Because if we go for hard regulation, and becomes like some ITU treaty or NUSA resolution, and then you got two major countries that don't sign up to that.
Next speaker, and I don't say the last speaker, is Neta Palkowitz from Dawn Aerospace. And Neta will highlight the recent developments and ongoing works in space sustainability, as Dawn does, are offering practical insights and showing us some cool toys. So, Neta, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Torsten. Okay, so we don't have much time. If I knew we don't have much time, perhaps I would have renamed my presentation, instead of refueling a sustainable future in space and so on, sustainability. Bring it on. So let us start. Just a few words about Dawn, so you know what we're talking about. So Dawn Aerospace, our primary business is green propulsion systems for satellites. We have the space plane, which went supersonic last week, which we're very proud of. I'm not going to talk about that at all. And there is a third big project or program we're working on. That will be the focus today. So, as fellow lawyers, I'm sure many of you have read all these instruments many times, perhaps them by heart even. When you ask me what promotes sustainability in outer space, I would probably say space debris mitigation and remediation, point you to one of these guidelines, which, as was said before by Cecile, are not binding unless in the form of national space law. And I think these instruments more or less repeat themselves. So there are always notions of the orbiting once the mission has gone to the end of its life. If you're in LEO, you go down. If you're in GEO, you go up, and so on. You need to avoid collisions as much as possible, not to create more debris. And there's a passivation element as well. So treat your energy sources. So what I wanted to do today is suggest what else can we do to promote sustainability even further. So anyone who was on the satellite operator's seat would know that the satellites go up with a certain amount of fuel. And right now, when that fuel is finished,
you're done, more or less. Yeah, there's no many options for life extension and so on. So a very expensive satellite and this disposable cup have quite a lot in common. And I think that is very inefficient and it's also very silly because you made so much effort on that satellite. You do not want to drain it and throw it to the bin. Another aspect of that is what is actually the legal status here. So in my experience, most jurisdictions and most universities as well, the common notion is that, okay, once the mission is over, the satellite becomes space junk, space debris, any term you want to use it. But of course, when we look at the space law, there is no such thing, right? A space object is a space object. It doesn't matter if the fuel ran out or something else is not functioning anymore. So this practice, it is an industry practice that, well, to start the era of space exploration, we had to do things this way. That's totally understandable. The law also doesn't address it. That's also understandable, I think. But let's see, what can we do to make it better? So, of course, the answer is to extend the life of the mission and to refuel the same satellite. So fill up the cup and use it again. But, of course, that is not yet done. Why is it not done? No one has designed their satellite to be refuelable. Why isn't that happening? The technology is not quite there yet. There is no regulation that requires you to extend your mission life as much as possible. So there's really no push from anywhere to do that, right? And just try and imagine for a second, if you would drive a car which you cannot refuel, how would that car look like? It would probably have this huge tank of gas and you would probably move it only when there is a very big emergency and you have to move it around. So if you follow what I'm trying to do here, up until now, this is what we're doing with satellites. And again, let's change it. Let's do something better. So today at 4:00, which now gives me the permission to talk about it, there was a press release that we issued. This is a port we have developed which makes satellites refuelable. And the press release went out because it went through environmental qualifications. So TRL 5, which is pretty good in space industry. But we should also think about how to solve the chicken and egg problem. In the case, how do we motivate people to refuel? How do we really push sustainability forward? So we have decided that with each propulsion system we produce, we are going to integrate this component. By default, the customer doesn't have to tell us, by the way, in 5 years, I would want to refuel my satellite. This now will just be the default. If you have propulsion, you will be able to refuel it in the future. So without going to the technical details, we really don't have time for that. We're also going to have the servicer, which will allow the refueling. We call it loop, because there is a very big recyclability element to this technology and to this program. There will be one vehicle which will, it will basically function as a fuel tank, and another one which will be the hardcore servicer running from to refuel satellite and refuel itself, like a bee getting a nectar from flower, let's say. And if you ask the person who is in charge on the technical aspects of that program, he doesn't even call it servicing, it calls it enabling, because again, as you would not plan ahead when to refuel your car, we want to be in a situation where this is the norm. I really like to say it's also a great compliance tool, but don't tell him that because he will be very upset. So why is this a good compliance tool? Basically, if we really manage to make the switch and operators are no longer afraid to maneuver their satellite and to waste fuel, let's say on collision avoidance maneuvers, and here the Iridium Cosmos crash, I think, is a pretty good case just to show you what happens when you make, let's say, the wrong calculation there and you don't maneuver and you want to save fuel, of course. We will increase safety in that sense. It will be easier to maneuver. It will reduce congestion because we will just have to launch less satellites. Even in constellations, you can replace less satellites and just extend the life of the ones that are there. We will delay, let's say, satellites becoming debris. So again, it's just preserving the situation better. It's better for end-of-life maneuvers as well, because right now, if you don't save enough fuel in advance to do the deorbiting, for instance, you cannot really deorbit properly. So knowing this is an option, I think, will help operators a lot. It will also preserve the situation with respect to the dark skies. Of course, there's no regulation yet about the dark skies, but we know there are a lot of discussions around that. So that should be helpful as well. And one very important point I want to make, refueling will complement all the other companies and services they develop for in-orbit servicing. Okay, so we heard Orbit and we heard ExoTrail before. If they can service more satellites by refueling, the whole ecosystem basically becomes more sustainable. Refueling can enable servicing as well. Okay, so I have a PhD in space law as well, so I felt very compelled to give you a table with a lot of standards. But let's not do that now. I will be very brave and very briefly say 2 words about the EU space law. Of course, we don't know what the EU is planning exactly for the space law. We do know there's going to be harmonization, which I think is very good news. We do know it's going to promote sustainability because there is a sustainability pillar, which I think as well is very good news. What we don't know is, are we dealing with something binding or non-binding when it comes to sustainability? There's a lot of talk about labels and other things which are not very clear. I would like to hope and to know whether servicing will be one of the topics or not. Will there be a push for that? And as a wish list, I would really want, first of all, to have clear definitions. What is debris and what is the disposal time and so on. And I would also like to have a framework for European companies to service each other in a very straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we are concluding this workshop, it's my honor to say here, heartfelt thank you to all the speakers that have been here. Thank you to you in the audience for your question and your engagement. And I would like to hand back to Ingo and Leslie Jane to some closing remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having attended the workshop. Thank you for contributing. Thank you to all the panelists, those who managed early and those who managed just in time. And I said at the beginning, we look forward to welcome you back again next year, but let us take one thing at a time. Thank you very much indeed, and stay in touch. The subjects will not run away. A final thanks to Torsten.
And if you have further questions, reach out to us at radio@SpaceWatch.Global. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Torsten Kriening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.